Now, here's a hot take. Despite the many stories that have been pumped out about the last-minute cancellation of Albo and Trump's meeting at the G7, I'm not sure it was actually the worst thing in the world for the Australian government, or Australia more broadly.
This is your hot take.
It has been funny, though, to watch some sections of the media absolutely lose their minds over it.
He's a pissant, basically, in Trump's eyes, I'd say.
And those making the most noise about it seem to be those that were probably hoping and praying for Trump to embarrass Albo on the world stage.
This is a complete humiliation for Albanese.
Humiliation for a Prime Minister who has no personal connection with US President Donald Trump.
Mind you, the cancellation of the meeting at the G7 hasn't stopped them from trying to pin the blame on the PM, though.
Think about how embarrassing it is for Australia that we've got Anthony Albanese and then Kevin Rudd as our ambassador to the US. And I absolutely do not blame Donald Trump for this. Prue, as you said, Anthony Albanese, Australia's been so anti-Israel.
Oh, yes, has he?
In the absence of anything new, they've been forced to run this old clip on high rotation instead.
Our Prime Minister once had this to say about Donald Trump.
We have an alliance with the US, we've got to deal with him, but that doesn't mean that you're uncritical about it. He scares the out of me.
But really, I think that defies all logic, context and common sense. I mean, for starters, when Albanese's office was hatching the plan to meet on the sidelines of the G7, I'm not sure they were expecting Israel to launch an attack on Iran, or that the US would be weighing up how heavily it wanted to get involved in another war in the Middle East.
I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host. He did a fantastic job. Thank you in Canada. But you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. I'm going to have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early.
And given the speed with which things kicked off, I don't think it's all that unreasonable that the US president would cut his time at the G7 short to return home. But the way some in the media have carried on...
Albo has now been stood up.
The snub from Trump.
This is a complete snub.
Snubbed our Prime Minister.
And continue to carry on. You'd think it was only Albo on the receiving end of the snub, which is not quite the case. It may go without saying, but events like the G7 are obviously highly stage managed. It was clear from the outset that day one of this event was reserved for the G7 leaders.
Well, you're not going to believe this. Anthony Albanese's at a different dinner to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I would believe that, because Australia is not a G7 nation. The G7 summit program was actually available online, and you could Google it and see what was happening and when.
How about that?
What do you mean?
That's what I'm told.
Do they separate the world
dinners.
leaders? Are they in tiers?
Yeah, I guess you could say that they are in tiers. There are the G7 countries, which Australia is not one of, and then there are the G7 Plus, or outreach partners. Australia is in that group. Outreach partners were only invited to join the G7 leaders on day 2. It was all there in the itinerary. So while I can appreciate the effort here to make it sound like Albo was Nigel No Mates and had been shockingly excluded from the party at the last minute, that's not the reality. Along with Albanese, Trump had been scheduled to have one-on-one bilateral meetings with a bunch of other leaders of the G7 outreach partners on day 2. These included Albo, obviously, as well as the Prime Minister of India, the President of South Korea, and the President of Mexico. When Trump left at the end of day 1, all Trump's planned day 2 meetings were cancelled.
Albo could have given Trump a Rabbitohs scarf, could have done all sorts of things.
Nah, I don't think that's going to cut it. And all this
hyperbole
seems to ignore the general feeling and sentiment of the majority of Australians. The reality is that, as the polling shows, there's not a lot of love for Trump in Australia. In polling of Australians conducted following Trump's Great Big Tariff Day, over 70% of respondents believe that a Trump presidency would leave them worse off financially, and just under 70% believed that Australia could rely on the United States for defence and national security. And in other polling commissioned by the Australia Institute, there were similar sentiments. More Australians prefer a more independent foreign policy than prefer a closer alliance with the United States. Half of Australians are not at all confident that Donald Trump would defend Australia's interest if Australia were threatened, compared to only 16% who are very confident that he would do so. Half of Australians think Donald Trump's election is a bad thing for the world, twice as many as think it is a good thing. So in terms of public opinion, for Albanese there doesn't appear to be all that much to gain by rushing to bend the knee. It's not going to increase increase his popularity at home. And it's unlikely to make much difference economically. I mean, trade with the US is a fraction of the business Australia does with China, for example. And in terms of AUKUS, well, putting aside any thoughts and opinions about signing on to that program in the first place, any fleeting meeting between the two leaders was, or is, unlikely to have any bearing on whether or not Australia ever receives an AUKUS sub. That will more likely be determined by whether or not the US can actually increase their rate of production, which as of right now sounds like an unlikely proposition.
All of our programs are a mess, to be honest. We are behind schedule and over budget. I think our best performing one is 6 months late and 57% over budget.
Ouch.
Perhaps Albanese missing out on a face-to-face meeting with Trump should serve as a good reminder for the government and the country of where Australia sits in the priority list for Trump's America. Rather than continuing to focus on the US, which appears to be shaping up as an increasingly unreliable ally, this gives Australia a chance to spread its wings. From an economic standpoint, there's a lot more to gain by working closer with the other G7 nations than there is trying to stroke Trump's ego for a little bit of light tariff relief. So yeah, I don't see that there's a hell of a lot for Albanese to gain politically or economically by publicly cozying up to Trump. But equally, I can't see Australia ever walking away from the US. When it comes to the US and US foreign policy, at the end of the day, I think the Australian government will always
acquiesce
or fall in line. And you don't need to look too far for an example of that. When the US decided to join Israel in the attack on Iran, it took a little longer than some might have expected, but around 24 hours later, the government fell into line.
The world has long agreed that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, and we support action to prevent that, and that is what this is. The US action was directed at specific sites central to Iran's nuclear program. We don't want escalation and a full-scale war. We continue to call for dialogue and for diplomacy. As I've said for many days now, we are deeply concerned about any escalation in the region, and we want to see diplomacy, dialogue and de-escalation. We've been upfront about the challenge facing the international community, that is, dealing with the threat posed by any Iranian nuclear weapons program and dealing with the risk of regional escalation. And that's why Australia called upon Iran to come to the table and abandon any nuclear weapons program. Iran didn't come to the table just as it has repeatedly failed to comply with its international obligations. We urge Iran not to take any further action that could destabilise the region.
The public announcement was clearly carefully worded, with the PM trying to walk the tightrope, supporting the US action while maintaining as much distance from it as humanly possible.
Well, we aren't a central player in this conflict, that's just a fact. This was a unilateral action by the United States. This was unilateral action taken by the United States. This was unilateral action taken by the United States. This was unilateral action taken by the United States. This was unilateral action taken by the United States. Thanks very much.
Yes, it was a public show of support for the US's actions from the government, but the only real word I have to describe the statement was flaccid. My take is that this was Albanese trying to run down the centre and hedge his bets. I mean, he won't have pleased the Australian-made MAGA crowd, nor will he have pleased those that will view his support for Trump's actions as hypocritical, given Australia's supposed commitment to rules-based international order. As Geoffrey Robertson, the well-known human rights barrister, points out, as a matter of international law, the US bombing Iran is no different from Russian President Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine, or the George W. Bush, Tony Blair, John Howard invasion of Iraq. And from here, as he points out, it's a very slippery slope, and should probably ring alarm bells for Taiwan. It's worth pointing out that he's not the only one that shares that view either, but this is a whole other topic of discussion. Coming back to the point, the US under Trump is looking more erratic, chaotic, and unreliable by the day. I mean, sending the military into California and bombing Iran, it means people aren't talking about this, I guess. Maybe he is a stable genius. I think that history shows that Trump will do what Trump wants, and at the end of the day, a 20-minute chat on the sidelines of the G7 is not going to change that. Had Albanese already submitted himself to the now standard White House public humiliation ritual,
have you said thank you once?
I don't think it would have made any difference whatsoever, other than to provide the Peters and Readers of the world with weeks, if not months, worth of content.